The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the sharp scent of leather polish filled my bedroom, making my already queasy stomach turn even more. I sat on the edge of my bed, fever burning through my body, holding a pair of designer heels that didn't belong to me, while my husband Jalen stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "She's coming over for dinner tonight," he said, his voice matter-of-fact, as if what he was asking was the most reasonable thing in the world. How do you process the moment when the man you've loved for 15 years hands you another woman's shoes and expects you to clean them while you're so sick you can barely stand? Before we begin, sweetheart, if this story touches you even a little, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where my family is tuning in from. My name is Brianna, and for most of my 41 years, I believed that love meant partnership, that marriage was built on respect and mutual care. I met Jalen when I was 24, working as a medical transcriptionist at the hospital where he was doing his residency. He was charming in that effortless way some doctors are, confident without being arrogant, ambitious but still kind to the nursing staff. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and I thought I'd won some kind of lottery, landing a man who was not only successful, but seemed to genuinely care about building a life together. The early years of our marriage were good, or at least I thought they were. Jalen finished his residency and opened a private practice specializing in cardiology. I stopped working when our daughter Kendra was born, a decision we made together, though looking back now I wonder if "together" was really the right word. Jalen suggested I stay home, said his income was more than enough, that Kendra deserved to have her mother available. And I agreed because it made sense at the time. What I didn't realize was that by giving up my career, I was also giving up my financial independence, my professional identity, and eventually, my voice in our marriage. We lived in a nice house in a suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people kept their lawns perfect and everyone smiled at each other at the grocery store. Kendra grew up healthy and happy, excelled in school, made friends easily. I spent my days managing the household, cooking meals, organizing Kendra's activities, supporting Jalen's career by hosting dinners for his colleagues, and attending medical conferences as the dutiful doctor's wife. On the surface, everything looked perfect, like a picture from a magazine about successful families. But underneath that surface, things had been shifting for years in ways I'd been too busy or too willing to ignore. Jalen worked late more and more often, came home smelling like expensive restaurants I'd never been to, grew distant in small ways that added up over time. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I changed my hair or bought a new dress. He'd scroll through his phone during dinner, take calls in the middle of conversations, look past me rather than at me when we talked. I told myself it was just the stress of running a practice, the demands of being a doctor, the natural evolution of a long marriage. Money became a source of tension in ways it never had been before. Jalen controlled all our finances, had always controlled them, but he started questioning my spending more aggressively. If I bought groceries that cost more than his mental budget allowed, he'd interrogate me about every item. "Do we really need organic produce? Why can't you shop at the discount store? Other wives manage to feed their families for half this cost," he'd say. He'd say these things casually, like he was just being practical, but each comment felt like a small cut, a reminder that I contributed nothing monetary to our household, that I was dependent on his generosity for everything from food to the shampoo I used. Kendra left for college 2 years ago, got a full scholarship to study engineering at a university 3 states away. I was proud of her, so proud. But her leaving created an emptiness in the house that I didn't know how to fill. For 18 years, being Kendra's mother had given me purpose and structure. Without her there, I was just Jalen's wife, living in a house that felt too big and too quiet, with a husband who barely acknowledged my existence except to criticize how I spent his money. That's when I started noticing the real changes. Jalen joined a gym, started dressing more fashionably, bought cologne that smelled nothing like what he'd worn for years. He'd come home after midnight, sometimes later, claiming emergency surgeries or consultations that couldn't wait. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, because the alternative was too frightening to consider. But some part of me knew, deep down in that place where we bury truths we're not ready to face, that my husband was lying to me. 6 months ago, I started having health problems. It began with fatigue, the kind that doesn't go away no matter how much you sleep, then progressed to joint pain, occasional fevers, unexplained weight loss. I went to doctors, had tests done, and they diagnosed me with an autoimmune disorder, something with a long, complicated name that basically meant my immune system was attacking my own body. The treatment involved medication that made me nauseous, that weakened my immune system further, that left me exhausted and fragile in ways I'd never experienced before. I expected Jalen to step up, to be the supportive husband a sick wife deserves. He's a doctor, after all. He understands illness and treatment better than most people. But instead of becoming more present, he became more absent. He'd complain about having to pick up takeout on his way home because I was too sick to cook. He'd sigh heavily when I asked him to help with household tasks I physically couldn't manage anymore. He'd look at me with something that felt uncomfortably close to disgust when I had to run to the bathroom because my medication was making me sick. Then, 3 months ago, I met her. Not officially, not in any way that was introduced or acknowledged, but I saw her. I'd gone to Jalen's office to drop off some insurance documents he'd forgotten at home, something that normally I would have just waited to give him, but he'd called and said he needed them urgently. When I walked into his practice, there was a woman sitting in his private office, not in the patient area, but in his personal space, laughing at something he'd said. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, beautiful in that polished way that requires time and money, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Jalen saw me through the glass wall, and his expression changed, just for a second, from relaxed and happy to something harder, more guarded. He came out to meet me in the hallway, took the documents without thanking me, and explained in a voice that was too casual that the woman was Simone, a pharmaceutical representative who was discussing new cardiac medications with him. She's very knowledgeable, he added, like he needed to justify why she was sitting in his office rather than a conference room, why she was laughing like they were friends rather than professional contacts. I drove home that day with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that illness and isolation were making me imagine things that weren't there. But I couldn't shake the image of how comfortable they'd looked together, how Jalen's whole posture had been different with her, relaxed and animated in ways he never was with me anymore. That night, when he came home 5 hours later than he'd said he would, I asked him about Simone, tried to keep my voice casual and non-accusatory. "What about her?" Jalen said, barely looking up from his phone. "You just seemed friendly," I replied carefully. "She's a professional contact, Brianna. I have dozens of them. Are you going to interrogate me about everyone I speak to at work?" he snapped. The way he said my name, with that edge of irritation, made me drop the subject immediately. I'd learned over the years that pushing Jalen on things he didn't want to discuss only led to arguments I never won, to days of cold silence that felt worse than any confrontation. The weeks that followed were strange, like living in a house with a stranger who happened to share my last name. My health continued to decline. Some days I could barely get out of bed, the medication making me feel worse before it made me better, if it was going to make me better at all. Jalen showed less concern with each passing day, treated my illness like an inconvenience he had to work around, rather than a serious health crisis affecting his wife. He stopped eating dinners at home, said he preferred to grab something after work rather than eat whatever I could manage to throw together, as he put it. Then came the night that changed everything, the moment that finally forced me to see what I'd been avoiding. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because Kendra had called earlier that day to check on me, and Tuesdays were when she usually had time between classes. I'd spent most of the day in bed, fever making everything feel fuzzy and unreal, my body aching in ways that made even lying still uncomfortable. Around 6 o'clock, I heard Jalen's car in the driveway, earlier than expected, and I forced myself to get up, to at least try to appear functional. He came in carrying shopping bags, expensive ones from stores I never went to, and walked past me to the bedroom without saying hello. I followed slowly, my body protesting every step, and found him laying out clothes on our bed. Not his clothes, women's clothes, a beautiful dress and accessories that definitely weren't mine. "What's all this?" I asked, trying to understand what I was seeing. "Simone's coming over for dinner tonight," Jalen said without looking at me. "She's been helping me with a research project, and I thought it would be nice to thank her with a home-cooked meal," he explained. The casualness of it, the way he said it like this was a normal thing to do, like inviting another woman to our home for dinner while his sick wife barely held it together, was just basic hospitality. I couldn't process it. "You're inviting her here?" I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Is that a problem?" Jalen asked, finally looking at me, and his expression was challenging, almost daring me to object. "I live here too, Brianna. I'm allowed to have colleagues over. Unless you're too sick to be a gracious hostess, in which case maybe you should just stay in the bedroom and let me handle everything," he said. The words hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't asking if I was okay with this, wasn't considering how inappropriate it was, wasn't acknowledging that bringing another woman to our home crossed every boundary a marriage should have. He was telling me this was happening, and I could either participate or hide, but I didn't get a vote. That's when he picked up a pair of shoes from one of the shopping bags, beautiful designer heels in deep burgundy leather, and held them out to me. "These need to be polished before she gets here," he said. "Can you take care of that? She's very particular about her appearance, and I want everything to be perfect," he added. I stood there, fever making my vision swim slightly, looking at those shoes that belonged to another woman, shoes my husband had bought for another woman, shoes he was now asking me to polish like I was some kind of servant. And in that moment, sick and exhausted and emotionally devastated, I didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to process what was happening. So I took the shoes, my hands shaking, and I sat down on the edge of our bed, and I tried to figure out when exactly my marriage had turned into this nightmare. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have guessed in that moment of humiliation and heartbreak, was that this was just the beginning of a story that would force me to find a strength I didn't know I had. I didn't polish the shoes. I sat there holding them for maybe 10 minutes, my mind going in circles, trying to understand how I'd arrived at this point in my life. Then I heard Jalen in the kitchen, heard him moving around, and I realized he was actually preparing for this dinner with another woman in our home, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I set the shoes on the bed and walked to the kitchen, my body protesting every step, the fever making everything feel surreal and disconnected. Jalen was taking out the good dishes, the ones we'd received as wedding gifts and only used for special occasions, the ones that represented celebration and joy and things that felt like they belonged to a different life now. "Jalen," I said, and my voice came out hoarse, weak. "We need to talk about this. This isn't okay. You can't bring another woman here, to our home, and expect me to just accept it," I said. He turned to look at me, and his expression was cold in a way I'd never seen directed at me before. "Accept what exactly?" he said. "A colleague coming over for dinner? A professional relationship that helps my career? Or are you going to start making accusations based on your insecurities and illness-induced paranoia?" he said. The way he dismissed my concerns, the way he made me feel crazy for objecting to something that was so clearly wrong, it was a technique I realized he'd been using for years. Anytime I'd questioned something, anytime I'd expressed discomfort or disagreement, he'd find a way to make it about my inadequacy, my overreaction, my failure to understand the complexity of his world. "I'm not being paranoid," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I saw how you looked at her at your office. I see how you're acting now, buying her clothes, bringing her here. This isn't professional, Jalen. This is something else. and you know it, I said. He slammed a plate down on the counter with enough force that I flinched. You want to know what this is? He said, his voice rising. This is me having one person in my life who appreciates me, who sees my value, who doesn't constantly need things from me. Do you have any idea what it's like coming home every day to someone who's always sick, always tired, always unable to do the basic things a wife should do? He said. The words hit me like ice water, shocking in their cruelty. I have an autoimmune disease, I said, my voice trembling. I'm sick because my body is attacking itself, not because I'm choosing to be this way. I'm doing everything I can to get better, taking medication that makes me feel worse, going to appointments, trying to manage a condition that there's no cure for, I said. And I'm supposed to put my life on hold because of that, Jalen said. I'm supposed to be celibate and lonely and unsupported because you can't fulfill your role as a wife anymore? That's not fair, Brianna. That's not what I signed up for when we got married, he said. The implication was clear now, no longer hidden behind professional pretenses or careful words. He was having an affair with Simone, or about to have an affair if he wasn't already, and he was somehow making it my fault, making my illness the justification for his betrayal. When you got married, I said slowly, each word taking effort, you promised in sickness and in health. Those were the actual vows, Jalen, the ones you said in front of our families and friends. Or did you not mean them? I asked. He laughed, a short, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. I meant them when I thought you'd always be the woman I married, strong, capable, someone who took care of things. Not this version of you, constantly weak and needy and demanding sympathy for every little ache and pain, he said. Every little ache and pain. That's what he thought of my autoimmune disease, the condition that was literally destroying my body from the inside, that left me in constant pain and exhaustion, that required medication that cost hundreds of dollars a month and still barely controlled my symptoms. Every little ache and pain. I want you to leave, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice despite everything. If you're going to have dinner with your girlfriend in our home, I won't be here for it. I'll go to a hotel until she leaves, I said. With what money? Jalen said, and there was something almost like triumph in his voice. You don't have a job, remember? You don't have your own income. Everything you have, I provide. So unless you plan to use my credit card to pay for a hotel so you can throw a tantrum, you'll stay here and behave like an adult, he said. The realization hit me then, fully and completely, of how trapped I was. I'd given up my career 15 years ago, had no recent work experience, no financial independence, no savings of my own. Everything was in Jalen's name, controlled by Jalen, accessible only through Jalen's permission. He was right. I couldn't even afford a hotel room without using his money, which he was now telling me I wasn't allowed to do. I have jewelry, I said, thinking of my wedding ring, some pieces that had been gifts over the years. I could sell something, stay somewhere for a few nights, I said. That jewelry belongs to the marriage, Jalen said flatly. It's marital property. You can't just sell it without my permission, and I'm not giving permission. You're staying here, Brianna. You're going to go to our bedroom, you're going to be quiet, and you're going to let me have one evening where I don't have to deal with your problems, he said. I wanted to fight back, wanted to find words that would make him see how wrong this was, how cruel and manipulative and emotionally abusive. But I was so tired, so sick, so overwhelmed by everything that was happening that I didn't have the energy. So I did what he said. I went to our bedroom, I closed the door, and I lay down on the bed next to those burgundy heels that I hadn't polished, that I would never polish, no matter what he demanded. From the bedroom, I could hear everything. The doorbell at 7 o'clock, Jalen's voice warm and welcoming in a way it never was with me anymore, Simone's laugh, high and musical, and utterly comfortable in my home. I could hear them in the dining room, could hear the clink of silverware on the good plates, could hear their conversation drifting down the hallway, casual and intimate and painful to listen to. At one point, Simone said in a playful voice, "Your home is beautiful, Jalen. You have such good taste," she said. And Jalen responded, his voice equally light, "I've worked hard to create a space that reflects who I am. Not everyone appreciates that, but I think you understand quality when you see it," he replied. Not everyone appreciates that. He was talking about me, dismissing 15 years of partnership, of creating this home together, of every meal I'd cooked in that kitchen and every room I'd decorated to make it feel warm and welcoming. In his version of our life, I was just someone who didn't appreciate his success, rather than someone who'd sacrificed her own career and identity to support his. I must have fallen asleep at some point, the fever and emotional exhaustion finally overwhelming me. When I woke up, the house was quiet, dark except for the streetlight coming through our bedroom window. I checked my phone and saw it was after midnight. Jalen was lying on his side of the bed, his back to me, already asleep or pretending to be. I got up carefully, my body stiff and aching, and went to the bathroom where I'd left my medication. My evening dose was hours late, but I'd been too upset to remember it, and now my body was paying the price with increased pain and stiffness. I took the pills with water from the bathroom tap, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. When had I become this person? This quiet, diminished version of myself who accepted humiliation and cruelty without fighting back. This woman who lay in her bedroom listening to her husband entertain another woman in her home. This wife who was told to polish another woman's shoes and couldn't find the strength to refuse. I went back to the bedroom and looked at Jalen sleeping peacefully, no apparent guilt or conflict disturbing his rest. And I knew, with sudden, absolute clarity, that I had to find a way out of this marriage, out of this situation, even though I had no idea how I was going to do it. Because this wasn't going to get better, wasn't going to magically resolve itself. Jalen had shown me exactly who he was, what he thought of me, and how little my well-being mattered to him. Now I had to decide who I was going to be in response, and that decision would determine everything that came after. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Jalen had already left for work. No note, no message, just gone, like the previous night hadn't happened at all. The dining room had been cleaned up, no evidence of the dinner except for the memory of hearing them together, laughing and talking while I hid in my own bedroom. I made coffee, my hands still shaky from the fever that hadn't broken, and sat at the kitchen table trying to think clearly through the fog of illness and emotional devastation. I needed help, needed someone I could talk to, someone who could maybe give me perspective on what was happening and what I should do about it. But who could I call? I'd lost touch with most of my friends over the years, partly because being chronically ill makes maintaining relationships difficult, partly because Jalen had never encouraged me to have a social life separate from his. Then I thought of my sister, Rachel. We'd been close when we were younger, had drifted apart as we built our separate lives, but we still talked occasionally, still cared about each other, even when months went by between conversations. I picked up my phone and called her before I could talk myself out of it, before I could decide that my problems were too complicated or embarrassing to share. She answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and slightly rushed. "Bree, hi! I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling?" she said. And something about hearing my childhood nickname, about the genuine concern in her question, broke something open inside me. I started crying, couldn't stop myself, and Rachel's voice immediately shifted to worried. "Bree, what's wrong? Talk to me, honey," she said. So I did, words spilling out in a rush now that someone was actually listening, actually caring. I told her about my illness, about Jalen's increasing cruelty and distance, about Simone and the dinner and the shoes. I told her everything, and Rachel listened without interrupting, letting me get it all out before she responded. "That bastard," she said finally, her voice tight with anger. "I never liked him. You know that? Always thought he was too smooth, too charming, the kind of guy who knows exactly what to say but doesn't necessarily mean any of it. But this is beyond anything I imagined," she said. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I don't have money, don't have a job, can barely function most days because of this disease. How am I supposed to leave when I have nothing?" I said. Rachel was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking. "First thing you do is document everything," she said. "Start keeping records of his behavior, his spending, any evidence of this affair. Take photos if you need to, save texts and emails, write down conversations with dates and times. You're going to need that stuff if this goes to court," she said. "Court?" I said, the word feeling foreign and frightening. "You mean divorce?" I asked. "Of course I mean divorce," Rachel said gently but firmly. "Bree, he's cheating on you while you're sick. He's buying clothes for another woman and bringing her to your home. He's financially controlling you and emotionally abusing you. What else would you call that situation except one that needs to end?" she said. She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of actually divorcing Jalen felt overwhelming. "I don't even know how to start that process," I admitted. "And I'm so tired, Rachel. The medication, the disease, it's like I'm fighting my own body every day, and now I have to fight my marriage too," I said. "You don't have to do it alone," Rachel said, her voice warm with determination. "I'm coming to visit this weekend. I'll help you figure this out, help you make a plan. And in the meantime, you start documenting. Every cruel comment, every late night, every piece of evidence that shows what he's really doing. Can you do that?" she asked. "I think so," I said, feeling the first small spark of hope I'd felt in weeks. "But Jalen controls all our finances. Even if I want to hire a lawyer, I don't have access to money," I said. "Then we'll figure that out too," Rachel said. "There are resources for women in your situation, legal aid organizations, pro bono attorneys. One way or another, we're getting you out of this. You just have to hold on and start gathering evidence," she said. After we hung up, I felt slightly less alone, slightly more capable of facing what was ahead. I went to my closet and found an old notebook I'd used years ago for journaling, back when I still thought my thoughts and experiences were worth recording. The first pages had entries from happier times, little notes about Kendra's childhood, about date nights with Jalen, about ordinary days that had felt meaningful then and felt impossibly distant now. I turned to a blank page and started writing down everything I could remember from the past few months. Dates when Jalen came home late, amounts he'd spent that seemed unusual, conversations where he'd been cruel or dismissive. Then I wrote about last night, about Simone and the dinner and the shoes, getting down every detail while it was still fresh in my mind. Over the next 3 days, I became a quiet observer in my own home, watching and documenting Jalen's behavior with new eyes. I noticed how often he texted someone and smiled, how he'd take calls in the garage where I couldn't hear him, how he came home smelling like perfume that definitely wasn't from any bottle in our house. I took photos of receipts I found in his pockets, expensive dinners for two, jewelry purchases that never appeared in my jewelry box. I felt like a spy in my own marriage. But Rachel was right. I needed evidence. On Thursday evening, Jalen came home earlier than usual and actually asked me how I was feeling. It caught me off guard, this sudden display of concern after days of indifference. "About the same," I said carefully. "The medication is helping a little, but it's a slow process," I said. "That's good," he said, but his tone was distracted, like he was just going through the motions of conversation. Then he added, "I need you to do something for me this weekend. I'm having a small gathering here on Saturday, some colleagues from the practice and their partners. I need the house to look perfect, and I need you to at least try to be presentable," he said. Gathering at our home, with his colleagues, probably including Simone. He wanted me to play hostess. to smile and serve and pretend everything was fine while he paraded his affair in front of me and whoever else he'd invited. The audacity of it, the sheer cruelty of expecting me to participate in my own humiliation left me momentarily speechless. "I don't think I'm up for hosting," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "I'm still dealing with fevers and fatigue. Having a house full of people might be too much for me right now," I explained. "This is important for my career, Brianna," Jalen said, his jaw tightening. "These are people who can refer patients to my practice, who can open doors for me professionally. I need you to pull yourself together for one evening. Is that really too much to ask?" he said. I wanted to scream at him that yes, it was too much to ask, that expecting your chronically ill wife to host a party that would include your mistress was beyond unreasonable. But I thought about Rachel's advice, about documenting everything, about staying calm and strategic. So instead of fighting, I nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can," I said quietly, "but I'll need help. I can't clean the whole house and prepare food in my condition. You'll need to hire someone to help, or do some of it yourself," I said. "Fine," Jalen said, already pulling out his phone. "I'll arrange for a cleaning service to come tomorrow, and I'll order catering for Saturday. You just need to be here, be pleasant, and not embarrass me," he said. Not embarrass him? As if my illness, my pain, my very existence had become an embarrassment he had to manage and minimize. I watched him walk away, already texting someone, probably Simone, probably telling her about the party, and I felt something harden inside my chest. This wasn't just about documenting his behavior anymore. This was about survival, about finding a way to reclaim my dignity and my life before he destroyed what little was left of both. Friday morning, the cleaning service arrived. 2 women who moved through the house with efficient professionalism. I stayed out of their way, partially because I was having a bad pain day, partially because watching strangers clean my home felt like another small defeat. This had been my job once, my contribution to our household, and now even that had been taken from me and given to paid professionals. I spent most of Friday in the bedroom, writing in my notebook, documenting every detail I could remember. I wrote about the shoes, about the dinner with Simone, about Jalen's cruel comments and his financial control. I took photos of the credit card statements I found in his desk drawer when he was at work, statements showing charges at expensive hotels, jewelry stores, restaurants. Each piece of evidence felt like a knife cutting away at the life I'd thought we'd built together, revealing the rot underneath. Rachel called Friday evening to confirm she'd be arriving Sunday morning, after Jalen's party was over. "I wanted to come sooner," she said, "but I couldn't get coverage at work until Sunday. Are you going to be okay until then?" she asked. "I'll survive," I said, and the word felt heavy with meaning. Survival. That's what my life had been reduced to, just getting through each day, each humiliation, each moment of pain without completely falling apart. "The party is tomorrow night. I'll play my part, smile when I'm supposed to, and then you'll be here Sunday and we can start figuring out what comes next," I said. Saturday arrived with gray skies that matched my mood perfectly. The catering company showed up at 4 o'clock, setting up tables in our living room and dining area, arranging food that looked beautiful and expensive and utterly meaningless to me. Jalen came home at 5, showered and changed into clothes I'd never seen before, expensive designer pieces that he must have bought recently without mentioning to me. "You should get ready," he said, barely glancing at me as he adjusted his collar in the hallway mirror. "Guests will start arriving in an hour. Wear something nice. Do your hair and makeup. I need you to look like you're actually part of this household, not like you've been lying in bed sick," he said. The cruelty in his words, delivered so casually, barely fazed me anymore. I'd become numb to his insults, or maybe I was just too tired to feel their full impact. I went to our bedroom and looked through my closet, searching for something that would satisfy his requirements, while also being comfortable enough for me to endure several hours of standing and socializing. I settled on a simple black dress, elegant but not showy, and did my makeup carefully, covering the dark circles under my eyes and adding color to my too pale cheeks. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me looked presentable on the surface, but her eyes were hollow, empty of the light that used to live there. This was who I'd become, a shell performing the role of wife while dying inside. The first guests arrived at 6:15, colleagues from Jalen's practice and their spouses, people I'd met before at medical conferences and hospital functions. I greeted them with practiced smiles, took their coats, offered drinks, played the gracious hostess despite the fever I could feel building again in my body. They asked polite questions about my health, and I gave polite, vague answers, nothing that would make anyone uncomfortable or suggest that anything in my marriage was wrong. Simone arrived at 6:30, and the moment she walked through the door, I felt the atmosphere shift. She was stunning in a red dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her hair styled in soft waves, her makeup flawless. She greeted Jalen with a familiarity that made several people glance between them with raised eyebrows, a hand on his arm that lingered too long, a laugh that was too intimate for a professional relationship. "Brianna," Simone said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you so much for having me in your beautiful home. Jalen has told me so much about it," she said, and I wondered what exactly he'd told her, what secrets about our marriage he'd shared with this woman. "You're welcome," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "Please, help yourself to food and drinks. Let me know if you need anything," I said, then moved away before she could continue the conversation, before I said something that would reveal how much I knew, how much I'd figured out. The party continued around me, people talking and laughing, the noise and activity overwhelming my already fragile state. I watched Jalen and Simone from across the room, watched how they gravitated toward each other, how they stood just slightly too close, how they communicated with glances and subtle gestures that spoke of intimacy beyond the professional. And I watched the other guests notice too, saw the exchanged looks and quiet conversations that stopped when I came near. Around 8 o'clock, I felt my fever spike sharply, felt a wave of dizziness that made the room tilt. I excused myself quietly and went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, tried to steady myself. When I looked in the mirror, I saw that my carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of fever on my cheeks, the glassy look in my eyes that signaled my body was losing its fight against the autoimmune flare. I took my medication, even though it wasn't quite time for it yet, hoping it would help control the symptoms long enough to get through the rest of the evening. Then I made my way back to the party, moving slowly, carefully, trying not to draw attention to how unwell I was feeling. That's when I heard it, a conversation I wasn't meant to hear, coming from the kitchen where I'd gone to refill the water pitcher. 2 of the wives from Jalen's practice were talking, their voices low but not quite low enough. "I feel terrible for her," one woman said, "having to host this party while she's clearly so ill, and with that woman here, practically draped all over her husband. Everyone can see what's going on," she said. "Jalen's not even trying to hide it," the other woman replied. "Poor Brianna. She must know, right? How could she not know? But what can she do? She gave up everything for him, and now she's sick and dependent. He has all the power," she said. I stood frozen in the hallway, the water pitcher heavy in my hands, listening to strangers discuss my humiliation with pity and judgment. They were right, of course, about all of it. Everyone could see what was happening. Everyone knew. And I was the pathetic wife who had to endure it because I had no other options. Or at least, that's what everyone thought, including Jalen. But standing there, overhearing myself described as powerless and trapped, something shifted inside me. Maybe I didn't have money, or physical strength, or financial independence, but I had something else, something Jalen had underestimated. I had documentation. I had witnesses who'd seen his behavior. I had a sister who was coming to help me, and I had a growing determination that I wouldn't let him destroy me without a fight. I walked into the kitchen with my head held high, greeting the two women with a polite smile that made them flush with embarrassment at being overheard. "More water for anyone?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fever and the humiliation and the absolute certainty that my marriage was over. They stammered responses and hurried back to the living room, and I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by catered food I hadn't cooked and evidence of a party celebrating my husband's professional success and personal betrayal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. I watched Jalen say goodbye to Simone at the door, watched him touch her arm with a familiarity that made my stomach turn, watched her lean in to whisper something that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. And I documented all of it in my mind, adding it to the growing list of evidence that would support the divorce I was now absolutely committed to pursuing. After the last guest left, Jalen was in a good mood, energized by the evening's success. "That went well," he said, loosening his tie. "Several people mentioned they'd be referring patients to me. This kind of networking is exactly what I needed," he said. "I'm glad it was successful for you," I said, each word carefully neutral. "I'm going to bed. The evening was too much for me," I said. "You did fine," Jalen said, already checking his phone, probably texting Simone. "Thanks for making the effort," he added, like I was a hired hostess rather than his wife, like I'd performed a service rather than endured hours of public humiliation in my own home. I didn't respond, just went to our bedroom and closed the door. I took off the dress and the makeup and crawled into bed, my body aching with fever and exhaustion. But despite everything, despite the pain and the betrayal and the uncertainty of what came next, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it, because tomorrow Rachel would arrive, and together we'd start building a plan, a way forward, a path out of this nightmare that Jalen had created. And what I was about to discover would give me exactly the leverage I needed to reclaim my life. Rachel arrived Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, pulling up in her sensible sedan with an overnight bag and a determined expression. She hugged me tightly at the door, and I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying for months ease slightly in her familiar embrace. Jalen had already left for his golf game, a regular Sunday morning activity that I now suspected involved more than just golf. "You look terrible," Rachel said bluntly once we were inside. "Have you been eating? Are you taking your medication? Bree, you're even thinner than when I last saw you," she said. "The medication kills my appetite," I explained, leading her to the kitchen where I'd made coffee. "And stress doesn't help. It's been a difficult few months," I said, which was perhaps the understatement of the year. We sat at the kitchen table and I showed Rachel my notebook, all the documentation I'd gathered over the past week. She read through it carefully, her expression growing darker with each page. When she got to the part about the shoes and the dinner party, she closed the notebook and looked at me with barely contained fury. "This is abuse, Bree," she said firmly. "Financial abuse, emotional abuse, probably adultery that could affect the divorce settlement. We're getting you out of here, and we're making sure you get what you're entitled to," she said. "I've been thinking about that," I said slowly. "What am I actually entitled to? We've been married for 15 years. The house is in both our names, but all the money is controlled by him. I don't even know how much we have, what assets exist, what debts might be hidden," I said. Rachel pulled out her laptop, opening it with purposeful efficiency. "We need to find out. Do you have access to his computer, his email, any financial documents we can review?" she asked. "His office," I said, remembering the room Jalen had claimed as his private space when we first moved into this house. "He usually locks it, but I know where he keeps the spare key. He doesn't think I'd ever go in there without permission," I said. "Well, today we're going in there, with permission, from the fact that you're entitled to know your own financial situation," Rachel said, standing up with determination. "Show me where it is. Let's see what your husband has been hiding," she said. My hands shook as I retrieved the spare key from the drawer in the laundry room, where Jalen kept it hidden under spare light bulbs. Walking to his office felt like trespassing, even though this was my house too, even though I had every right to know about our family's finances. Years of being told I didn't need to worry about money, that Jalen would handle everything, had trained me to stay out of financial matters. The office was exactly as Jalen liked it, neat and organized, with his medical degrees framed on one wall and family photos that felt increasingly like props on another. Rachel went straight to his desk, opening drawers and filing cabinets with confident efficiency, while I stood by the door, my heart pounding with anxiety about what we might find. "Here," Rachel said after about 10 minutes, pulling out a folder labeled Personal Finances. She opened it, and her eyes widened as she scanned the contents. "Bree, you need to see this. Right now," she said. I joined her at the desk, looking over her shoulder at bank statements, investment accounts, and financial documents that revealed a picture I'd never imagined. We had over $800,000 in savings and investments, money I'd never known existed. While Jalen had been questioning my grocery spending and making me feel guilty for buying necessities, we'd had nearly $1 million sitting in accounts I'd never been told about. "That's not all," Rachel said, pulling out another document. "Look at this. He's been paying rent on an apartment downtown, $1,500 a month for the past 8 months. Want to bet that's where he takes Simone?" she asked. The evidence kept piling up, each document another piece of proof that my marriage had been a lie for longer than I'd realized. Credit card statements showing jewelry purchases that never came home to me, hotel stays when he'd claimed to be at medical conferences, restaurant charges that added up to thousands of dollars spent on someone who wasn't his wife. Then Rachel found something that made everything else pale in comparison. "Oh my God," she whispered, holding up a document with shaking hands. "Bree, he's been moving money. Large amounts, transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. This started 6 months ago, right around when your illness got worse," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "He's hiding assets, isn't he? He's preparing for a divorce, moving money where I can't touch it," I said. "That's exactly what he's doing," Rachel confirmed. "He's been planning this for months, systematically hiding marital assets while making you feel guilty for basic expenses. And I'm willing to bet he was planning to divorce you on his terms, making it look like there's barely anything to divide, leaving you with almost nothing," she said. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. While I'd been sick and vulnerable, trusting him to take care of our family's financial well-being, he'd been setting up my impoverishment. He'd been planning to leave me with nothing, knowing I had no career to return to, no income of my own, no way to support myself. "We need to document all of this," Rachel said, already taking photos of every document with her phone. "This changes everything. He's committed fraud, hidden assets, violated his fiduciary duty to the marriage. A good lawyer will take this case in a heartbeat, probably on contingency, because there's clearly money to recover," she said. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything in Jalen's office, photographing documents, taking notes, building a comprehensive picture of our actual financial situation versus what Jalen had led me to believe. The more we found, the more my shock turned to something else, something that felt almost like calm resolve. Jalen had underestimated me, had assumed I'd never find out, had counted on my illness and dependency keeping me trapped. But now I knew everything, and knowledge was power, maybe the only power I'd had in years. By the time we finished and carefully returned everything to exactly how we'd found it, I felt different. Still sick, still tired, still dealing with an illness that made every day a challenge. But no longer helpless, no longer without options, no longer willing to accept the role of victim in the story Jalen had been writing. "What happens now?" I asked Rachel as we sat back in the kitchen, the evidence safely backed up on her phone and laptop. "Do I confront him? Do I just file for divorce? What's the right move here?" I asked. Rachel thought for a moment, her expression serious. "We don't confront him yet. If he knows we've found this stuff, he might move more money or destroy evidence. First, we get you a lawyer a really good one who specializes in high-asset divorces and hidden asset recovery. Then we make copies of everything and put them somewhere safe that he can't access. Then and only then do we hit him with divorce papers, she said. I can't afford a good lawyer, I said, the reality of my situation hitting me again. I don't have access to money without him knowing, I said. I do, Rachel said simply. I have savings, and I'm lending you whatever you need to get through this. You can pay me back from the settlement, but right now we're getting you the best representation possible, she said. That afternoon, while Jalen was still out, Rachel made calls to lawyers she'd researched, attorneys who specialized in cases like mine. By Monday morning, I had a consultation scheduled with a woman named Patricia Morrison, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being aggressive when it came to protecting her clients' interests, especially in cases involving hidden assets and affairs. Jalen came home Sunday evening in a good mood, whistling as he walked through the door. "How was your day?" he asked, actually seeming interested for once, probably because his day with Simone had gone well. He didn't notice Rachel's car was still parked down the street, didn't realize anyone had been here, didn't suspect that everything had changed while he was gone. "Quiet," I said, keeping my expression bland. "I rested mostly. How was golf?" I asked, playing my part perfectly. "Great," he said, loosening his collar. "Beautiful day for it. I'm going to shower, and then I have some work to do in my office," he said, already heading toward the stairs, toward the office where Rachel and I had spent hours uncovering his secrets. I waited until I heard the shower running, then texted Rachel, who was waiting at a coffee shop nearby. "He's home. Everything is fine. See you tomorrow for the lawyer meeting," I texted. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband, this man I'd loved for 15 years, this stranger who'd been systematically planning my destruction while pretending to care. He fell asleep easily, no guilt disturbing his rest, while I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that was coming. The confrontation, the divorce, the legal battles, the uncertainty of rebuilding my life at 41 with a chronic illness and no recent work history. It was terrifying, overwhelming, all of it. But it was also necessary, the only path forward that didn't involve completely losing myself. And I had something now that I hadn't had before. I had evidence. I had help. I had a plan. And most importantly, I had proof that Jalen had vastly underestimated the quiet, sick wife he thought he'd completely controlled. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been, and the lesson was going to cost him dearly. Monday morning, I met Patricia Morrison in her downtown office, a space that radiated competence and success with its polished furniture and shelves lined with legal volumes. Patricia was in her 50s, sharply dressed, with eyes that missed nothing as she reviewed the documentation Rachel and I had brought. "This is good," she said after reviewing everything for 30 minutes. "Really good. The hidden assets, the apartment rental, the obvious affair, all of it gives us significant leverage. And the fact that he's been moving money to offshore accounts while you've been ill, that's going to look very bad for him in court," she said. "What happens now?" I asked, my hands twisted together in my lap. "How long does this process take?" "What should I expect?" Patricia leaned forward, her expression kind but businesslike. "First, we file for divorce. We cite adultery and financial misconduct as grounds. Simultaneously, we'll request a temporary restraining order, preventing him from moving any more assets or changing account access. We'll also request temporary spousal support, given that you have no income and a documented illness," she explained. "He's going to be furious," I said, imagining Jalen's reaction when he was served with papers. "What if he tries to hurt me? Or cuts me off financially before the court can intervene?" I asked. "That's why we're moving fast," Patricia said. "We file tomorrow, get you served immediately, and request an emergency hearing for temporary orders. Most judges are very sympathetic to situations like yours, a chronically ill spouse who's been financially controlled and deceived. We'll make sure you're protected, she said. The next 48 hours were a blur of signing documents, making plans, preparing for the explosion that was coming. Rachel stayed with me at a hotel Rachel had booked under her name, using her credit card so Jalen couldn't track where I was. I'd left the house Wednesday morning while he was at work, taking only essential items and documents, leaving behind 15 years of life in the suburban home that had become a prison. On Thursday morning, Jalen was served with divorce papers at his office. Patricia had arranged for service at his workplace deliberately, making the situation as uncomfortable as possible, forcing him to face public acknowledgement of the divorce. My phone started ringing within an hour. Jalen calling over and over, leaving increasingly angry voicemails that Patricia told me to save as evidence of his temperament. "You can't just leave," his first message said. "You have no right to file for divorce without even discussing it with me. This is my house, my money, my life you're disrupting. You're going to regret this, Brianna. You have nothing without me, and I'm going to make sure you end up with nothing," he said. I didn't answer his calls, didn't respond to his texts. Patricia had advised complete no contact, except through lawyers, and I followed her instructions precisely. Each angry message he left just added to our documentation of his behavior, his controlling nature, his lack of concern for my well-being. The emergency hearing for temporary orders was scheduled for the following Monday. Patricia warned me that Jalen would likely bring his own attorney, that he'd try to paint me as unstable or vindictive, that he'd deny the affair and claim the offshore accounts were legitimate financial planning. She also warned me that seeing him again would be difficult, that he'd probably try to make eye contact, to intimidate or guilt me into backing down. But when Monday arrived and I walked into that courtroom, my sister on one side and my attorney on the other, I felt surprisingly steady. Yes, I was sick, dealing with a fever that morning that I'd barely managed to control with medication. Yes, I was scared about my financial future and how I'd rebuild my life. But I was also done being the woman who accepted humiliation and cruelty without fighting back. I was done being invisible in my own marriage, done being treated as less than, done accepting Jalen's version of reality. Jalen sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in protecting wealthy clients from the consequences of their actions. Jalen looked angry, his jaw tight, his eyes hard when they met mine across the courtroom. But I held his gaze without flinching, without looking away, and I saw something shift in his expression, maybe the first realization that I wasn't going to be easy to intimidate anymore. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Sarah Chen, called the hearing to order. Patricia presented our case first, laying out the evidence of hidden assets, the offshore accounts, the apartment rental, the affair with Simone. She showed the bank statements, the credit card charges, everything we'd documented. And she presented my medical records, showing the severity of my illness, the cost of my medication, my complete financial dependence on Jalen. Jalen's attorney tried to counter, claimed the offshore accounts were legal tax planning, that the apartment was for work purposes when he needed to stay late at the office, that his relationship with Simone was purely professional. But Patricia had screenshots from Simone's social media, photos of her and Jalen at restaurants and events, pictures dated to times when he'd told me he was working. The evidence was overwhelming, and even Jalen's expensive attorney couldn't spin it into something innocent. Judge Chen listened to everything, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. When both sides had presented their cases, she didn't hesitate. "Mr. Morrison," she said, looking directly at Jalen, "the evidence presented here suggests a pattern of financial deception and marital misconduct that this court takes very seriously. I'm granting Mrs. Morrison's request for a temporary restraining order on all marital assets. You are hereby prohibited from moving, selling, or otherwise disposing of any assets until this divorce is finalized. Additionally, I'm ordering you to pay temporary spousal support of $5,000 per month, and you will continue to cover Mrs. Morrison's health insurance and medical expenses, she ruled. Jalen's face went red, and I saw him lean over to whisper furiously to his attorney. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, I'm ordering an immediate forensic accounting of all marital assets. If it's determined that you've hidden or dissipated marital property in anticipation of divorce, you may be required to reimburse the marital estate, and this court may consider sanctions. Do you understand? She asked. Yes, Your Honor, Jalen said through gritted teeth, barely controlling his rage. I sat there, feeling Rachel squeeze my hand under the table, feeling something that might have been relief or vindication or just exhaustion washing over me. This was just the beginning, the temporary orders that would carry us through until the final divorce decree, but it was a victory nonetheless. After the hearing, Patricia walked us out of the courthouse, her expression satisfied. That went extremely well, she said. Judge Chen clearly saw through his attorney's attempts to minimize the evidence. The forensic accounting will uncover everything he's hidden, and with that kind of financial misconduct, you're looking at a very favorable settlement, she said. How long will all this take? I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of the morning, the stress and the fever and the emotional toll of facing Jalen in court. I just want it to be over, I admitted. These things take time, Patricia said gently. Probably 6 to 8 months for everything to finalize, especially with the forensic accounting. But you have support now, both financial and emotional. You're going to get through this, Brianna, she said. Over the next few weeks, I started building a new life, piece by piece. Rachel helped me find a small apartment I could afford with the temporary support payments. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe and mine. I set up my medical care with new doctors, made sure my prescriptions were filled and covered by the insurance Jalen was court-ordered to maintain. And slowly, carefully, I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my life after the divorce was final. The forensic accountant Patricia hired discovered even more than we'd initially found. Jalen had hidden nearly $1 million in various offshore accounts and investments, money that should have been disclosed as marital assets. He'd also been paying for Simone's apartment, her car, expensive gifts, all using marital funds, while telling me we couldn't afford basic household expenses. The depth of his deception was staggering, even after everything I'd already discovered. Meanwhile, Jalen's life began to unravel in ways that had nothing to do with me. Word of the divorce and the circumstances spread through his professional community, and several of his colleagues distanced themselves from him. Simone, it turned out, wasn't interested in a relationship with a man going through an expensive divorce and potential professional sanctions. She stopped returning his calls, moved on to someone else, leaving Jalen to face the consequences of his choices alone. He tried to reach out several times through mutual acquaintances, asking if we could talk, suggesting we could work things out. But Patricia advised against any direct contact, and I agreed. There was nothing left to work out, nothing to say that would change what had happened or heal what had been broken. Jalen had shown me exactly who he was when I was vulnerable and sick, and I believed him. 5 months after filing for divorce, we reached a settlement. I would receive half of all marital assets, including the money Jalen had hidden, plus the house, which I could sell or keep as I chose. I'd receive 3 years of rehabilitative alimony, enough time to retrain for a career and rebuild my financial independence. And Jalen would continue covering my health insurance until I could secure my own through employment. The settlement was fair, maybe even generous considering some divorce outcomes, but it felt like barely enough compensation for 15 years of partnership and the trauma of how it had ended. Still, it was closure, a legal ending to a marriage that had died long before either of us filed papers. It's been a year now since that night when Jalen handed me another woman's shoes and expected me to polish them. A year since I sat on our bed, sick and humiliated, wondering how my life had reached that point. And so much has changed in ways I couldn't have imagined then. I sold the house in Willowbrook Estates, couldn't bear to live in a space with so many painful memories. With my share of the proceeds, I bought a small condo closer to the city, with better access to my doctors and support systems. It's not as big or impressive as the house was, but it's mine, truly mine, and that matters more than square footage ever could. I went back to school, enrolled in an online program to update my medical transcription credentials and learn new healthcare administration skills. My illness still makes some days difficult, but I've learned to work around the bad days and maximize the good ones. I recently accepted a part-time position at a hospital, working from home most days, building back my career slowly but steadily. My relationship with my daughter Kendra strengthened through all of this. She was angry with her father when she learned what he'd done, how he'd treated me when I was sick. She still talks to him occasionally, but their relationship is strained in ways I don't think will ever fully heal. But she and I have grown closer, and she tells me often how proud she is of how I handled everything, how I found strength when I needed it most. Rachel jokes that I should send Jalen a thank you card for underestimating me. I won't, of course, but there's truth in her humor. If he'd been even slightly less arrogant, less confident that I'd never fight back, he might have gotten away with more. But he assumed my illness made me helpless, that my financial dependence made me powerless, and those assumptions cost him dearly. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Jalen's struggling now, not financially, but personally. The divorce settlement and forensic accounting fees hit him hard, and his reputation in the medical community never quite recovered. He's dating again, still searching for something he'll probably never find, because he doesn't understand that relationships built on appearances and convenience don't last. I don't take pleasure in his struggles, but I don't feel sorry for him either. He made his choices, and consequences followed. As for me and my illness, I've made peace with it in ways I couldn't when I was married. Some days are still hard, days when the pain and fatigue make even basic tasks feel impossible. But I've learned to be gentle with myself, to accept help when I need it, to understand that having limitations doesn't make me less valuable. Jalen taught me the opposite, that my worth was tied to my usefulness, but surviving this experience taught me something better. I've made new friends, people I met through support groups for chronic illness, through my return to work, through my community. Real friendships built on authenticity rather than social positioning. We have coffee dates and movie nights and honest conversations about the challenges of living with illness, without anyone making me feel guilty for not being perfect. Looking back at that moment when I sat holding those burgundy shoes, I barely recognized the woman I was then. So beaten down, so convinced I had no options, so trapped by circumstances that felt unchangeable. But circumstances did change, because I changed them, because I found strength I didn't know I had and refused to accept the role of victim that Jalen had assigned me. This emotional story isn't a simple one with a clear villain and hero. Yes, Jalen behaved terribly, betrayed our marriage vows, prioritized his desires over my well-being. But I also learned that I'd played a role in my own diminishment, had accepted treatment I shouldn't have accepted, had stayed silent when I should have spoken up, had given away my power piece by piece until I felt I had none left. That's a lesson I carry with me now, a reminder that maintaining boundaries and self-respect isn't selfish. It's essential. When people ask me about my response to Jalen that night, what I said when he handed me those shoes, I tell them the truth. I didn't say anything dramatic or clever or confrontational in that moment. I was too sick, too shocked, too overwhelmed to find the perfect words. But my real response came in the days and weeks that followed, in the quiet documentation and strategic planning, in the decision to value myself enough to leave, in the courage to face an uncertain future rather than accept a certain degradation. My response was choosing me, choosing my health, my dignity, my right to be treated with basic human respect, choosing to believe I deserved better, even when I was at my lowest point. And that response, that choice, changed everything. If you're in a situation where someone makes you feel small, where your illness or circumstances are used against you, where you're told you have no options, I want you to know something. You always have options, even when they're not immediately visible. You always have worth, even when someone tries to convince you otherwise. And you always deserve respect, regardless of your health, your income, or your dependence on others. The road forward might be scary, might require help and courage and patience you're not sure you have. But that strength exists inside you, waiting for the moment you need it most. Trust yourself, document everything, find your allies, and refuse to accept less than you deserve. Your response to betrayal doesn't have to be immediate or dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful response is the quiet, strategic determination to build a better life, one difficult decision at a time. And remember, this is a real-life story, my story, but it's also the story of countless others who faced similar situations and found their way through. You're not alone in this, whatever this looks like for you. Reach out, seek help, believe in your worth, and take that first step toward the life you deserve. Because no one should ever hand you someone else's shoes and expect you to polish them, literally or metaphorically. And your response to that moment will define not just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of the next. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you had? How did you navigate a difficult situation where you felt powerless? Please consider liking this video and subscribing for more calm, authentic stories about navigating family drama, finding dignity in difficult circumstances, and learning that we're stronger than we think. Thank you so much for listening to my story. May you never have to polish anyone else's shoes, and may you always remember your worth.